husband and mother-in-law thought the house was theirs when they threatened me with divorce, but now they can move in together and chase their twisted little relationship, because it turns out it was my inheritance all along. I'm Katie, a 30-year-old office worker who somehow ended up living in what could easily be the plot of a sitcom. I'm a hard-working woman. That's me, married to a man who's still tied to his mother's apron strings. That's my husband, Gary. And then there's my mother-in-law, who honestly believes she's the Queen of England. I know what you're thinking. Oh, sweet Katie, why on earth did you marry a mama's boy? Well, let me tell you, love makes you blind, deaf, and apparently very stupid. When I met Gary in college, he seemed like a dream come true, tall, handsome, and capable of forming full sentences, which is rare in the wild jungle of higher education. A few years later, there I was, living in a beautiful $2 million house with my husband and our daughter. A house I inherited from my father. Sounds like a fairy tale, right? Well, buckle up, because this is where things get interesting. See, my dear husband and his loving mother somehow got the impression that this beautiful, spacious, and outrageously expensive house existed thanks to Gary's hard work and his mother's impeccable taste. But before I tell you the juicy details of how I pulled off the biggest reality check of the century, let's rewind to the hilariously frustrating and downright absurd chain of events that led to the moment I finally dropped the ultimate truth bomb. I was a bright-eyed college student, armed with nothing but a dream, a pile of textbooks, and an unhealthy addiction to cafeteria coffee. Gary walked into my life like a knight in shining armor. If that armor were made of football jerseys and beer cans. Our eyes met across a crowded classroom. Love at first sight. Okay, fine, not that romantic. He spilled his energy drink all over my notes, and I might have said a few words that would make a sailor blush. But hey, nothing says true love like sticky fingers and ruined study notes. From that moment on, we were inseparable. The first sign of Gary's unique relationship with his mother came on our third date. Picture it. Candlelit dinner, soft music, us gazing lovingly into each other's eyes, when suddenly his phone rings. He ignores it like any sane person would on a date. Or so I thought. Our Gary lunges across the table to answer it. "Hi, Mom," he says, with the excitement of a golden retriever seeing its owner after 5 minutes apart. What followed was a 15-minute conversation about whether he'd packed his lucky underwear for finals week. I wish I were joking. I should have run for the hills. Instead, I sat there sipping my cheap warm wine thinking, oh how sweet, he loves his mom so much. Past Katie, if I could travel back in time, I'd slap you across the face hard. Years passed, and suddenly we were engaged. How did that happen, you ask? Well, let's just say it involved a poorly rehearsed proposal speech that mentioned his mother no fewer than 5 times, and me, in my infinite wisdom, saying yes. Wedding planning was an experience. And by experience, I mean a nightmare sprinkled with passive-aggressive comments from my future mother-in-law. This is where Carol really began to shine. Every decision, from the napkin color to the cake flavor, had to be approved by Carol. God forbid we chose lavender instead of lilac for the bridesmaids' dresses. I swear she almost had an aneurysm. And Gary? As helpful as a chocolate teapot. Whenever I asked his opinion, he'd shrug and say, "Whatever you and Mom think is best, honey." I should have known right then. I wasn't just marrying Gary. I was entering a polygamous relationship with him and his mother. But the real fun began when we started house hunting. Most couples bring a realtor or a trusted friend for advice. Us. We brought Carol. The final straw was when we found a house we all agreed on. Meaning Carol approved it, and I was too exhausted to keep arguing. As we stood in the living room, Carol turned to Gary teary-eyed and said, "Oh, sweetheart, I can already see our family gathered here on Christmas morning." Our family. Not his. Ours. I was standing right there, somehow already erased from the picture. Did Gary correct her? Of course not. He just nodded, probably imagining himself in bear print pajamas while Mommy watched lovingly from the couch. Now you're probably wondering, why didn't you just leave? Trust me, I've asked myself that same question roughly 37,042 times since then. But love, exhaustion, and the sunk cost fallacy are a dangerous mix. So against all logic, and probably several natural laws, we got married. The wedding? Let's just say if you look up circus in the dictionary, you'll find a picture of our wedding party. Carol wore white. Yes, you read that right, white. At her son's wedding. When I pointed it out to Gary, he shrugged and said, Mom says it's more of an off-white. Off-white, my foot. It was whiter than a polar bear in a snowstorm. But we did it. We said our vows, cut the cake, and began our new life together. And by together, I mean with Carol's constant presence lurking in the background. You'd think once we were married and settled in our new home, which of course Carol had chosen, things would calm down. Nope. Life with Gary was like a three-legged race, except the third leg was Carol's, always trying to trip me. She was everywhere. If she wasn't physically present, she was there in spirit, living rent-free in Gary's head and dictating every detail of our lives. Buying a new couch? Better check with Mom first. Trying a new dinner recipe? Mom makes it differently. Painting the guest room? Careful, sweetie. Carol might not like that color. Before I knew it, I was pregnant. Most women enjoy their pregnancies, baby showers, nursery decor that glow. Me? I got Carol's constant commentary on everything I ate, drank, or did. Apparently, when you're carrying precious little Gary Jr., you lose the right to think for yourself. Oh, Katie, should you really be drinking coffee? I never touched that poison when I was pregnant with Gary. Well, that explains so much. Are you sure about that nursery color, dear? Studies show it could affect the baby's cognitive development. Pretty sure Gary must have sniffed that same paint. And Gary just nodded along with everything she said. I swear, if Carol told him standing on his head singing lullabies would ensure a healthy baby, he'd have been upside down before I could say umbilical cord. When I went into labor, guess who showed up? Carol. Gary called her before the hospital. Not kidding. There I was, bringing new life into the world. My husband on one side looking ready to faint, and my mother-in-law on the other, offering pearls of wisdom like, when I gave birth to Gary, I didn't make half that noise. Having a baby just gave Carol more ammunition. Now I wasn't just a bad wife. I was a bad mother. Every choice I made was wrong. Feeding, changing, singing, constant criticism. All delivered with that sweet, condescending smile that made me fantasize about pushing her into a vat of wet cement. Gary, of course, was thrilled. Mommy and baby under the same roof. The fact that his wife was losing her mind totally escaped him. It was around then that I realized I had to make a change. Not for me. I was too far gone. But for my daughter. I refused to let her grow up thinking it was normal for her father to consult his mother before making every decision. So I did what any sensible woman would do. I switched jobs. Yep. I quit my stable, well-paying position for one that paid less but gave me more time at home. Because I was determined to be there for my daughter in a way Gary never would. Of course, Carol had plenty to say about that. Oh, Katie, are you sure that's wise? How will you support Gary's lifestyle on that salary? As if his lifestyle of video games and asking mommy which socks to wear required 6 figures to maintain. But I stood my ground. For the first time since meeting Gary, I made a decision without caring what Carol thought. And no, this isn't the end of the story. Not even close. Remember that $2 million house I mentioned? That's where things really start to get interesting. Update 1. So remember that perfect family life Gary and Carol thought they had going? Yeah, that illusion didn't last long. After months of enduring their nonsense, I finally snapped. It wasn't one big dramatic moment. It was the accumulation of all the little things. The constant criticism, the decisions made without me, the endless comparisons to St. Carol the perfect mother. One night, while Gary was glued to his video games and Carol was, shocker, visiting again, she had the audacity to tell me that my daughter would turn out better if I learned from her example. That was it. I calmly stood up, looked her dead in the eye, and said, Carol, the only thing I've learned from your example is how not to raise a man. You could have heard a pin drop. Gary turned pale. I swear if his mom had told him to breathe again, he would have stopped out of guilt. Carol, of course, gasped dramatically. Oh, how dare you speak to me that way under my son's roof? That's when I smiled. Your son's roof. I repeated. Funny, because last I checked, this house was in my name. Her face went redder than a tomato in July. Gary blinked at me like I'd just spoken another language. He stammered. What do you mean your name? I crossed my arms and said it loud and clear. This house was my father's. He left it to me when he passed. It's my inheritance, not yours, not your mother's, and definitely not ours. You could see the gears turning in Gary's head, slowly, painfully. Apparently, he'd always assumed that since we were married, the house somehow became his. Wrong. I told him. If you think you can threaten me with divorce and still live here, you can go pack your bags, both of you. Carol started shouting about how ungrateful I was, that I was destroying the family. But for the first time I didn't care. I looked straight at Gary and said, You want to be mommy's little boy? Fine. Go live with her. You'll have each other, and I'll have peace. He didn't move. Neither did she. So I did, straight to my lawyer's office. Within a week, divorce papers were on the table. Gary begged, Carol cried, but I was done being the background character in their weird mother-son drama. The house. Still mine. My daughter? Staying with me. Gary and Carol? They can play house somewhere else. Now every time I walk through my living room, I can't help but smile. Because while they're probably arguing over who makes better pancakes, I'm here, free, peaceful, and no longer living under their roof. And you know what? That's better than any fairy tale ending I could have dreamed of. Update 2. A few weeks after the divorce papers were signed, I finally started to breathe again. No more yelling. No more what would mom think. Just me, my daughter, and the quiet hum of a house that finally felt like home. But peace never lasts long when drama runs in your ex's DNA. One morning, while I was getting my daughter ready for school, there was a loud knock on the door. I opened it. And guess who was standing there? Gary. Looking like he hadn't slept in days, holding a cardboard box and wearing that same confused, lost expression he always had when Carol wasn't around to tell him what to do. Katie, he said. Mom kicked me out. I had to bite my tongue to stop myself from laughing. Apparently, after he moved back in with her, the honeymoon phase didn't last. According to him, Carol started helping with everything. And by helping, I mean criticizing how he folded laundry, what he cooked, how he breathed. Eventually, she told him she needed her space, and that maybe he should learn to be independent. Irony is a beautiful thing. He asked if he could stay, just for a few nights. I looked at him, then at my daughter, who was watching the whole scene unfold like a soap opera, and I said, No, Gary. You made your bed. Go lie in it. Preferably somewhere far away from here. He begged. He promised he'd change, that he'd cut ties with his mom. But I wasn't born yesterday. The last time he said that, Carol was literally hiding in the backyard, just checking on us. So I told him, I hope you and your mother find happiness separately. And I closed the door. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't second-guess myself. I just smiled. Later that night, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat on the couch, and thought about everything I'd been through. And for once, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Now my daughter and I have our own routines. We dance in the kitchen, eat breakfast for dinner, and laugh way too loud. The house, my house, is filled with life again. Gary still tries to call sometimes, usually after some new argument with Carol. But I don't pick up. Because I've learned something important. Peace is priceless and no man or his mother is worth losing it for. So if anyone out there ever wonders whether it's worth standing up for yourself, trust me, it is. Because sometimes losing two people is exactly what it takes to finally find yourself. Update 3. It's been 6 months since I officially closed that chapter of my life, and honestly, I've never felt lighter. The house is finally mine legally and emotionally. No ghosts of toxic love, no echo of Carol's criticism bouncing off the walls. Just me and my daughter, building something peaceful from the wreckage they left behind. You'd think after everything, Gary and his mother would have learned to leave me alone. But people like them don't learn, they linger. A few weeks ago, I ran into Carol at the grocery store. I was reaching for a jar of pasta sauce when I heard her oh-so-familiar voice behind me. Well, if it isn't Little Miss Independent. I turned around, smiled politely, and said, Carol. Still shopping for your son's groceries? Her face tightened like she'd just bitten into a lemon. She huffed. I was only trying to help him. You ruined that boy. I raised an eyebrow. Funny. I thought I was saving myself. She didn't have a comeback for that. Instead, she muttered something about karma and stormed off with her cart. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Later, I heard through mutual friends that Gary had moved in with a coworker, and that didn't last long either. Apparently, when you've been babied your whole life, living like an adult feels like climbing Everest without oxygen. Do I feel bad? Not anymore. I used to think leaving him made me cruel. Now I realize staying would have been worse, for both of us. The truth is, sometimes you have to let people drown in their own decisions. You can throw them a lifeline 100 times, but if they're determined to stay underwater, you're just wasting your breath. My daughter's doing great, by the way. She's growing up strong, smart, and unafraid to speak her mind. And every time I see her laugh, I know I made the right choice. Last weekend, she drew a picture of our family for school. Just me, her, and our cat Muffin. When I asked her where Daddy was, she shrugged and said, "He lives with Grandma, right? They can be together forever." I tried not to laugh, but yeah, out of the mouths of babes. So to anyone out there stuck in a situation that feels impossible, listen. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. Sometimes walking away isn't selfish, it's survival. And in my case, it was the best decision I ever made. Because while Gary and Carol are probably still arguing about whose fault it was, I'm sitting here, sipping my coffee, in a quiet house that finally feels like mine. And you know what? Peace is the sweetest revenge.